Hello there, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of the Meet with Big Pauly, which makes me Big Pauly. How are you doing, everybody? This 13th of May, 2021. We'll have Anthony from Bleacher Bums Gaming and Glory Days Boxing coming in here in just a little itty-bitty bit. Hope everybody's been enjoying the channel of the late 137 subscribers. Thank you all so much. Picked up a few subscribers as of late, and I thank you very much for all of that. Over the past few days, I've been putting more and more stuff on Twitch, and I've been showing it on a tape-delayed basis on YouTube, and I've been putting it on later in the evening, and it's been working out very, very well for me. Getting some nice content back, getting some nice comments, and I thank you all very, very much for it. So if you see my eyes darting around, I'll have Anthony in here in just a moment. I'm keeping an eye on Twitch and I'm keeping an eye on the mailbox because I didn't know which one he would see first, but I'm seeing that, yes, I'm checking my mail. Yes, indeed, I am live. Are you all seeing me fine? Well, it would help if I go to the comments section, wouldn't it? Captain Carl, how are you doing, sir? How you doing, sir? Good of you to drop by this Thursday evening. I really wasn't paying attention to what everybody was doing on YouTube tonight. I was watching the Rays game for a little bit. They were up 4-0 on the Yankees, and it is still true. Last time I saw end of the fifth inning. Whoop, whoop. Didn't mean to show you that because I showed you accidentally one of this. I am sorry, folks. I'm trying not to get in trouble here. I'm trying. I should mention that next week we already have a guest lined up. It's going to be Tom Vogel of Wrestling's Finest, and we're going to continue the interview that I had with him and Al. Al, Red Sox fan, hosted it, and we'll follow up on what's been going on in his little world. Tom is thinking about bringing in the wrestlers from AEW and ROH I live in a home here in Pinellas Park, Florida that's like half on one power grid and half on another. So if you see the lights flicker for just a little itty bitty bit from time to time, that's what happens. So yeah, it's kind of an awkward setup here, but it works for me. So I'm just gonna take a swig of water. Funny the noise you make when you have your mouth up to the bottle. So, how's everybody doing this Thursday evening? Had a great chat last week with who I will call, for lack of a better term, Virginia Rob, exclamation point, I guess you could say, and we had a nice little chat. And it mainly was about wrestling, which is okay because I have a feeling that a lot of my fans, a lot of the people who subscribe to me like wrestling, so, you know, we might do a more wrestling-themed chat, but I could, you know, I've grown up around sports all my life. My father was a Dallas Cowboy fan who was a meat cutter in New York most of his life, and then he moved down to Florida when he met my mother. My father passed on in 1991, and like I said, he was a big Tom Landry fan. He was a big fan of the Dallas Cowboys. If the Buccaneers weren't playing, he would watch the Dallas Cowboys, and he'd really be into the Dallas Cowboys. Speaking of Tom Vogel's game, I'm going to go ahead and thank you so much, Carl. That the beginning of the next week, after I deposit my winnings with my fantasy football league, you won't go wrong, Carl. It might be a little bit of a learning curve for Wrestling's Finest, but I think you all will enjoy it. And we definitely want to have Tom back on the show. Well, I was on with Al, Red Sox fan. Let's keep that straight. I was on with Al, Red Sox fan, and that was the first time I had guested on a show anywhere. So I'm very grateful to Al to have had me on, and now we're going to have Big Pauly. How are you? I'm doing fine, Arnold. I'm doing fine. We'll have Anthony on in here in just a little bit. I'm looking at the PDF of his supplemental set that he is putting out. Hello, Al, Red Sox fan. Love wrestling signage. Yes, yes. And we're going to have, we're talking to Tom, talk to Tom Monday about having him on next Thursday evening, the 20th. And I think we'll have a good time talking about the game to great detail. Thinking about calling it the inner workings of wrestling science. But back to this new supplemental set that Anthony has out. Talk about filling in the gaps, if there were gaps. The 100 fighters he has chosen, I believe it's 100. We can ask him here in a minute. In fact, speak of the devil, I see him, the man himself. Let me just add him to the screen. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing there, sir?
What is up, Big Pauly?
Oh, glad to have you on. I was just starting to talk about the supplemental set a little bit. Did a little housekeeping in the first few minutes of the show. And this is a bang-up set, man. Good job with this.
Yeah, it's I actually I was not going to do a junior divisions when I first released the game. I hadn't intended to, and there was a lot of basically a lot of requests and feedback, and so I decided to put this together and not go full in on the juniors, but put a top not necessarily even top 20, but 20 good fighters or great fighters in each of the 4 divisions I released. And actually, the more I got into the process, I got really excited about it because there's this set, there's a lot more parity because you don't have your your tomato cans, your bums in there. These are all pretty much top level guys. So as the further I went along, the happier I got with the decision to listen to the community, which is what it's about anyway. It's about the people who are good enough to support you when you create a game. You need to do your best to give them what they want, because when they purchase it, it becomes their game, not yours. So just listen to feedback, and I'm real excited, especially the junior welterweight set. Actually, I think that's going to be a lot of fun matchups in there.
Well, I can attest to the parity of your sets, having done Big Pauly's Fight Nights now for a month, and some of the upsets we have been having. I don't know if I should spoil that or not. But yeah, it's a tremendous set. Just looking at the current and historical fighters you're adding on. And some of these fighters, like for instance, you got Evander Holyfield at a cruiserweight. And I was just looking at him in the 84 Olympics and how he got kind of screwed by the Olympic Committee, the decision, because he threw a extra punch at Kevin Barry. And you got screwed out of that. It was a judgment call. There's always going to be judgment calls. Evander Holyfield obviously didn't want to stay in the cruiser division. He's one of the best heavyweights, but I always thought that Holyfield was one of the best cruiserweights of all time.
His cruiser card is a little bit better than his heavyweight card, actually, which, I think if he had stayed down there, he would have remained a dominant champion at that weight class for sure.
So, like I said, these fighters are just lights out. So many names. Now, I haven't watched boxing all that much the last 10, 20 years of my life, but I know who Manny Pacquiao is, and I know some of the names, like Mr. Alvarez, who just beat Billy Joe Sanders.
What's up?
Yeah, sorry about that. But he's pound for pound. You got to pay attention to him. I saw that you had here the number 4 fighter right now, according to BoxRec, and Dylan White. He looks like he could be a good fighter. 28-2 right now. They call him the body snatcher. Let's see here. Terry Norris is in this set.
Mm-hmm.
So is Winky Wright, who is a fighter I was following because he was from St. Petersburg. And trying to think of the guy who just fought Floyd. Keith Thurman is also from the Bay Area. He's from Clearwater, one-time Thurman.
Keith Thurman's due to get back in the ring soon too. He's been he didn't bounce back too well from that Pacquiao loss, but
no, I think that kind of exposed Foreman a bit. Thurman's weaknesses a bit. Pacquiao, just give him a fight. To put him in any division, just give him a fight. He'll find a way to be competitive in it, for heaven's sakes. I remember when he was on HBO for the first time, I think he was a junior featherweight, and now he's like, around welterweight now?
It's amazing the level. I mean, for his age, the level that he fights at, and you saw a good example of an age fighter if you watched the Andy Ruiz, Chris Areola fight a couple of weeks back. Areola dropped him in the second, and honestly, if Areola was prime, he probably would have capitalized and could have stopped him. But, as the fight went on there, Areola's as tough as they come, but the speed, just couldn't hang with Ruiz, who actually for a heavyweight probably has the fastest or among the fastest hands in the heavyweight division right now. So still a good fight, though. Very entertaining. Also
in this set was another fighter I used to follow quite a bit because he just beat the stew out of Sugar Ray Leonard, and that's Terry Norris.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to ask you what Norris's foul rating is because it's probably stratospheric. Because it seemed like every fight he had, he got into trouble.
Yeah, and then Norris, probably of the junior middleweights, and I've purposely in testing stayed away from some matchups with those guys because I didn't fight Tony Ayala Jr. against Terry Norris in testing because I wanted to experience that after the fact. But Norris is probably the best fighter in that set. The other two that are going to be up there, Laurent Budiani, the Italian junior middleweight, John Mugabe, who was very solid as a junior middleweight, well, not a lot, but significantly better than he was as a middleweight. So those two guys, and Winky Wright, of course, is a very good fighter, and some older guys, Freddie Little. So it's going to be like I said, that'll be a fun set. But I still think the best matchups are in the junior welterweight division, just because you have Kostya Tszyu and probably two of the best defensive fighters ever in this junior welterweight set in Nicolino Loche and Dulio Loy.
I was going to ask you about Loy because I was looking at his record and I was familiar with him a little bit from the card title bout game. Yeah, he seemed to have had a very, very, very good career, Dulio Loy. If I could back up a little bit, Anthony, and ask you about the origins of Glory Days Boxing, and how that came to be, just a little rough thumbnail of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I go back to Title Bout 1. I got that. Like I said, I wasn't a huge board gamer as a teen, but I boxed. I boxed amateur and loved the sport, loved the history of the sport, and ran across Title Bout Boxing in a outlet store in Salt Lake City. And, it intrigued me, so I picked it up. And pretty soon, the place I worked, one of the owner's sons was a very big fight fan too. And so after work, I worked nights then as a teenager. A couple of nights a week, we would, after we closed down and everyone was gone, we would sit there and had this huge heavyweight tournament. So we'd stay for, sometimes 3 or 4 hours just fighting this tournament out with the original title bout. So fast forward, and I've stayed in touch actually with Jim Trunzo. We're friends, and a lot of respect for him because he's the godfather of the boxing board game. And I still think Title Bout 1, the original, was one of the best sports board games ever created. So fast forward, before I knew he was going to work on a Title Bout 2, and also before I'd heard about Legends of Boxing, which is a great game that Gary Brown puts out, I decided, you know what, I want to create a boxing game that I want to play, and I want to make it dice-based. That's the one thing I didn't necessarily like about Title Bout is I sometimes felt the cards, the fast action cards, didn't give enough randomness. And again, a minor nitpick. It's, obviously it's a great game, but so I just started messing around with Glory Days Boxing, and like I said, I was making a game just for myself that I wanted to play. And when I started getting into board games again, 3-4 years ago, I put it up on my channel just as a lark, and it generated some interest, and people asked about it. And as I got going, I finally made a decision. I'm like, I really don't want to release it, because I thought about the process of the pressure of having to release fighter sets, and dealing with the whole retail thing. I just wasn't sure I wanted to do that. But one day I just say, you know what, I'm going to release this. I gave a date, and then I'm like, well, hell, I'm stuck with it now, so I have to. So for better or worse, I was forced to proceed, and I did a lot of tightening up on the game and took some feedback from the community. Notable things like ID Jester. He questioned about how I decided to generate who went first in a toe-to-toe exchange, and I'd always been going. Initially, I went with the highest rated fighter, and he gave some feedback. He's not even a boxing guy, but he's like, well, isn't it fair that sometimes the other guy should go first too? So that got the wheels turning, and that's how actually I came up with the momentum system based on his feedback after I thought about it. So I took feedback there, and redesigned the cards a couple of times. If you've seen the very first videos, the cards look absolutely nothing like they do now, and just kind of took went with it from there. And quite honestly, when it released, I was still to this day, I'm very humbled by the positive feedback I get, and very grateful for that. And I didn't envision that other people would actually want to buy it and play it, but so it's turned out good. And, it's still, I don't look at it as a business. It's still a labor of love. It's not something I look to make money on. I really don't make much money at all on it with after costs, and but it's not why I did it. I just did it because I love boxing and wanted to put something out there that like I said, I like playing, and I'm just happy and blessed that other people like to play it too. It's it's a good feeling there. So appreciate the support from everyone on the game.
My story with Title Bout, I found it in 1989, and the game came out in 79. There was this hobby store not too far from where I work, which was a radio station in downtown Clearwater. And on my 18th birthday, I picked it up. I picked up Title Bout. And I totally agree with you about Mr. Tronzo. And how he has carried the genre on for many, many decades. And I used to have a lot of fun with those heavyweights, but you're right that the one thing you bring to the table, I think, Anthony, is that ring general's role, the roll the six-sided dice. It kind of reminds me of Stratomatic and what Hal Richmond did with the hitter and the batter, hitter and pitcher confrontation, where if it's 1, 2, 3, it goes to the hitter, or however they do it. It splits hitter to pitcher. So that was a neat little invention, and it gives you the chance to have a fighter pull off an upset if he gets a good series of fortunate rolls.
And that's what I'll be honest, I took some inspiration on that from Status Pro Baseball, because they have that control system. And so I was looking at that, and I liked something similar that could be done with dice. And then I also wanted, I thought one thing that was missing from the original Title Bout was the toe-to-toe action, because that takes place a lot, especially with two evenly matched fighters who are sluggers. And so that's kind of wanted to incorporate something of that nature. And so the Ring General stars worked really good for that, and that you'll get more toe-to-toe exchanges with evenly matched fighters. So that's kind of where that inspiration came from.
Oh boy. I see that you are going to be in the near future doing a fight with Robin Blake and Gervonta Davis. Now, I'm familiar with Blake, but again, Davis being a relative, he debuted in 2013. Any scouting report you could give us on Davis before that fight commences?
Gervonta Davis might be the hardest pound-for-pound puncher in boxing right now.
Yeah, they call him the Tank, yeah.
It's almost not going to be fair to Robin Blake, because I look at Davis. He's one of four really strong up and coming lightweights that I like, along with obviously Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, and Devin Haney. And down the road when he moves up, Shakur Stevenson will probably be in that lightweight mix too. So I think that division right now is potentially the most exciting in boxing over the next couple of years. But Davis, he's a bull. He's like a mini Joe Frazier. Comes in, throws a devastating uppercut, has good hand speed. You can hit him, and that's going to be the test as he ups his competition. He's going to take some shots. So how he can stand up. In his last fight, Leo Santa Cruz, connected a couple of times, but Santa Cruz is not a overly huge power puncher. But, he exposed a couple of things, but Davis ended up stopping him with a very brutal uppercut midway through that. So, yeah, Davis is one of the up-and-coming young stars of the game, and I would expect him to take care of Robin Blake in 5 or 6 rounds.
Yeah, I'm with you on that camp. Blake, yeah, I could see him getting into trouble and so forth. Another fighter in this card set I wanted to bring up because I thought he could have been one of the great welterweights of all time, was Aaron Pryor. He was a junior welterweight fighter. He's probably best known for the 2 fights he had with Alexis Arguello. And I remember that fight in the Orange Bowl in '82 because that came right after the Mancini-Dooku Kim fight. And everybody was concerned about Arguello succumbing the way he did. And that was all. Howard Cosell wrote a lot about that in his book, that he was getting concerned, and that's why he stopped broadcasting the fights. But yeah, Aaron Pryor, that's got to be a standout on this card too, this set too. Yeah,
and I did a couple of test fights with him. I actually fought him against Nicolino Loche during testing, and Pryor was his own worst enemy. And in my opinion, his tenacity in the ring and good hand speed and obviously great power and tough to hurt. I mean, I think he could have been regarded as a top pound for pound guy. I mean, he's still regarded up there as one of the top fighters historically, but even if he hadn't have been his own worst enemy, even better. It's unfortunate, but he kind of ran into the pratfalls that some fighters run into. But yeah, he always he was a scary fighter. And during research for him, I remember going back and watching. He fought Tommy Hearns in the amateurs.
Yeah,
and he was older than Hearns, but you know how skillful Hearns was, and his ferocious punch.
Hands of dynamite.
But Pryor just, and again, he was older, but he just manhandled Hearns in the amateurs. And that's one thing, that's one fight I would have loved to see in the pros, a rematch between those two that never happened.
Yeah, imagine if Pryor had moved up to welterweight and cashed in, a Pryor-Leonard fight. That would have been something. Or as you say, a Pryor-Hearns fight would have been big money for Pryor. I guess the problems he had in his career would be the reason why he never moved up to welterweight for the reasons. And I just think Pryor missed a great opportunity to make a lot of money.
I agree with that, and one thing too. Back in that time period, now it's so common for fighters to between 2 or 3 fights, go up another division. And it didn't seem to happen as much back then. Pryor, again, fought his whole career at junior welter, even though he could have made a very solid welterweight. His height might have been a little bit of a detriment there, but he could have handled most any of the top welters around in his time, and I think would have been a really good fight with Tommy Hearns for sure.
Let me acknowledge Utah Mike, Sports Time Machine, and DG Sports Patrol have joined the chat. We've had Alex Fox fan in, Captain Carl, and thank you all for dropping by. And don't let me forget to thank you all for visiting on this the meet with Big Pauly, as I like to call it, for the lack of a better term. I seen you play a game called College Grid Zone, and I was very fascinated by that. Would you mind giving that a plug?
Yeah, that's another, and say a quick hello to Utah Mike and to DG Sports Patrol. Good to have you guys. It's another Gary Brown game. And to me, Grid Zone is one of the more brilliantly designed games out there because it's not an exact simulation of football. Obviously, it's like a 7-on-7, but it's easy enough. I've rated some college teams, and Gary's working on pro sets as well. And it's easy enough to translate. And it gives you a really fun, exciting football experience in about, 20 to 25 minutes to play a game, which is really huge because a lot of the football games out there take an hour to an hour and a half to play. And, if you want to get through something quicker and still have that excitement, Grid Zone is definitely a must get. And the one thing I like about it too is, it's designed to capture the big moments, the big plays of a football experience. So, there's really no slog to it. It's again fast paced and exciting all the way through. And I'm working on a college football game too, and obviously I'm not going to copy any systems, but I'm trying to right now. What I'm working on the most is trying to come up with a combination system where instead of playing every play, calling every play, you simulate portions of a drive, and then you either have to punt or you get into scoring territory. Then you go play by play. So, it's Grid Zone definitely was an inspiration for putting something together like that for people who just want to get through a football game a little bit quicker too.
The first bout, as I listen, Mugabe versus Minchilio.
That actually, that'll be a good fight, Al. Luigi was a very clever boxer. He had a decent amount of pop too, and Mugabe limited as a boxer, but the hardest hitter in the junior middleweight division, and if he could touch you, he could put pretty much anyone to sleep. So yeah, that should be a fun fight to play out.
You should put it up there, Al. You should put it up and let us all watch it, because that sounds like that would be an excellent fight. My first memories of sports are boxing and wrestling. So that's kind of like that I like to stick with. I was too young to remember that Foreman Lyle fight in '76. Oh, good heavens. Those guys could slug. George Foreman, he's a very interesting fighter in terms of how do you rate him, because he kind of had two careers. He had the career in the 70s, and then he had the career like 87 to 97.
Yeah, I kind of did a hybrid rating on that. This might surprise you, but I think George Foreman was a better fighter during his second career, and I'll tell you why. As a young fighter, he was thickly muscled. He fatigued quickly. He was ferocious and scary as hell, but he didn't really know how to box. He just came at you and clubbed you into submission. And you saw when you saw his fight with Jimmy Young, which I think I watched as maybe a 13 or 14-year-old. Young, and it's the same way Ali beat him in the with the rope-a-dope. He fatigued him, didn't get sloppy, was patient, and let Foreman wear himself out. Jimmy Young outboxed him, did the same thing. And when George came back in his second incarnation, he'd slowed down. He obviously wasn't as thickly muscled. He was, still thick, but and he was a smarter fighter. He was still very much a plotter, but his defense had improved. There wasn't a lot of wasted motion in his punches, and he actually, to me, had better stamina as an older fighter, which is incredibly unusual the second time around. So yeah. And hey, Arnold, I have not done any of the Stanley Ketchel stuff for a while. I think I've got like 8 fights done. My problem is I get sidetracked with designing and testing and other things with the boxers too. And I need to exhibit more focus on my projects, and that's a thing I don't do very well.
Well, I think everybody appreciates your openness and honesty about all that, Anthony. And I mean that sincerely. Stanley Ketchel, of course, was a very interesting figure in the middleweight division. He fought Jack Johnson once, and he lost to a handful of teeth.
Yep. You know, and Ketchel, it's hard to, you know, it's hard to imagine how good or great he would have been. I mean, he died at the age of 24 when he was murdered. You know, and he really wasn't even in his prime yet. And already, you know, I mean, he's historically, I think, considered a top 10 or close to top 10 of all time middleweight. And I think he would have cemented that legacy. The Johnson fight, you'll see pictures of him side by side, and Ketchel's wearing this big overgrown jacket, or, you know, that's 3 sizes too large. They had him standing on a box or with lifts in his shoes to look like closer to Johnson's size, you know. But you saw in the ring, Johnson too big and powerful for Ketchel, and they were supposed to have a worked fight where Johnson kind of carried him and more like an exhibition, and Ketchel saw an opening and, you know, clocked Johnson, knocked him down, and Johnson got right back up, and like you said, ended up with a glove full of his teeth with the next punch when he knocked him cold. But
well, I imagine it'd be kind of hard to work a fight.
Yeah, you know, when I think Johnson could do it. Johnson knew, I mean, he could handle Ketchel. You know, they were doing it as a payday because of the gate attraction that was going to be middleweight champ versus Johnson. And Ketchel, I think, just kind of, and they were actually, according to stories, friends. But I think Ketchel saw an opportunity and tried to cash in. It didn't go too well for him.
Oh, boy. Let's see what we got in the chat. We got DG Sports Patrol. Sorry, I did not see that accurately, DG. Question, Anthony, what boxing references do you consult with when crafting the boxer ratings? Could you recommend a good reference book on boxing stats and history?
If you want a really interesting book, actually, Jim Trunzo has a book out called Boxing by the Numbers, and it's more focused on heavyweights, but it gives a very in-depth analysis of ratings and how fighters kind of match up against other fighters across generations. I recommend that highly. The sources I use, I just read a lot of different biographies. I've read Nat Flesher's book. A lot of time on BoxRec. That's a very good resource comparing fighters and who they fought. And believe it or not, I spend every set, I probably spend, 40, 50 hours or more on YouTube watching fight videos. And, you know, it's amazing. Boxing is the one sport where you can actually find a lot of older fight videos that, you know, don't exist in other sports. So, you know, those are the main resources I use. I've got a pretty big collection of boxing books on my Kindle, old-time books, because old-time fighters are the toughest to rate. So I look for autobiographies on them to try and get a better feel. I've got Sam Langford's, Tom Sharkey's, the John L. Sullivan, Jake Kilrain fight, Unforgivable Blackness, which is the Jack Johnson book. So I just have a score of books like that I use as resources, as well as the Ring Encyclopedia and BoxRec.
Well, you just answered one of my questions about BoxRec, about how well that is, and it is a good reference. I just didn't know, you know, what you thought of it, because, you know, Wikipedia gets a bad reputation for being a reference tool in real life. Yeah, like for research, for people doing research and stuff. But yeah, I haven't heard anything bad about BoxRec. I'm glad you were.
BoxRec is it really is a source of truth for the most part. And, you know, the nice thing about it is sometimes they have that little wiki section in there, and you can find newspaper accounts of the fights. And I actually do that too. I'll go on to major newspaper sites and try and go back and search for newspaper accounts of historical fights, things like that.
It's also who did they fight? Yes, Al, it is. It is very much who did they fight, and that is factored into it. You know, who did they fight and when did they fight them? I think those are two important elements if you're going to rate a fighter.
Yeah, not all 25-0 guys are created equal for sure.
Well, look at what just happened to, unfortunately, Billy Joe Sanders. I mean, did Sanders? It seemed like he was never. You now correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony. But was Sanders ever in the ring with a fighter with the skill of Canelo Alvarez?
No,
It looked like he just. Well, I don't blame him for the stoppage. I don't blame him for stopping the fight when he had the orbital bone problems in his eye. Don't blame him for that. Try to get another payday, sure. But go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, he's getting a lot of grief for that, and
I don't agree with it.
If he had gone out for the 9th round, he would have probably suffered some irreversible damage. And I thought he had a pretty good game plan. I did not have him winning the fight, but I had it very close. I thought he was boxing very well, and the thing with Canelo is he figures you out, and then he just upped the pressure, and he caught him with that uppercut. And Sanders' bone, this whole bone on the side right here, basically became disattached. Yeah, so it was sunken in. I looked at a doctor's explanation a few days after the fight, where he detailed the type of break. It was an orthopod fracture, or I believe that's in the terminology. But if he had gotten hit that solid in that spot again, he probably would have lost an eye, and his career might be over now. But if he'd taken more shots there, it definitely would have been over. So
you got to salvage something out of all of that. It reminded me a lot of the Hasim Rahman fight with Evander Holyfield. I was just looking at this a couple hours ago, where he had that big old lump on the side of one of his, like above the eye, like a little, kind of like a little above the temple. And that was the ugliest thing I had ever seen watching boxing. And I remember that very, very well. It was from a headbutt, and they stopped the fight. And I think Holyfield won it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are painful. I've had a hematoma from boxing there, and it hurts. They're not necessarily dangerous, but it hurts like hell if you take another shot on there. But Sanders definitely that. I mean that, not to be too extreme, but I mean that honestly could have been a life-threatening type injury if he'd taken another shot in that spot the same way.
I thought everybody on the internet, I thought, as is their wont, to borrow a Howard Cosell phrase, they are too quick to judge, and they don't know the situation. And I'm sure a lot of them were changing gears when they figured out, oh yeah, that was an orbital bone injury, and it could have cost him his eye, as you're saying, or it could have done much worse. I don't want the eye falling out. Not to be gross about it.
You can't question. I don't think you can question most boxers' toughness. I mean, it's not fun to get hit in the face. It doesn't feel good, and just to get in there and do it, that's that takes.
They're not taking the punches.
Huh?
They're not taking the punches.
No, exactly.
So we got a comment here from Captain Curl. I saw Leonard Hearns on pay-per-view. I had a bout with them on Title Bout 1 when they were welterweights, and GEDB gives a much better feel and watching them go at it in the ring. And Hearns had that fight. Leonard had to come back from behind and knock him out. That was a hell of a fight. Well, it was like top 10 of all time, in my mind.
And thank you for that feedback too. And yeah, I did a fight not too long ago, a few months ago, where the third match with them, and Hearns it was actually a very close fight too, but Hearns came and finally got his revenge and stopped Sugar Ray in that one.
Al Red Sox fan, my man, Sanders' injury was like Kell Brook's injury against GGG, which is Golovkin, right?
Yeah. Gennady Golovkin.
Yeah, no,
it's very similar. It's it's again, there's a lot of scary stuff that can happen in the ring. It's one punch, and sometimes it's just the angle the punch hits too, that you can take dozens of hard shots and then just get hit just right and something breaks, or worse. So yeah, it was That was a nasty injury.
Do you follow amateur boxing any, Anthony?
What's that?
And amateur boxing?
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to ask you what you're thinking of the if it comes off the Tokyo Olympics in a couple of months.
I'm sorry, the what?
The Tokyo Olympics. How do you think will fare in the Olympics?
You know what? I have not followed that as closely as I normally do. I used to really love watching the Team USA versus the world matches they used to do on Wide World of Sports, and they don't do enough of that anymore. I mean, I think now a lot of fighters use amateur boxing. They don't necessarily use it like fighters used to, where they really tried hard to get into the Olympics. I think a lot of guys now turn pro before if they see an opportunity to get money, and because there's a lot of very, very solid young fighters out there that could have been great Olympians that just didn't want to wait. So,
well, without the TV coverage, yeah, I could see a lot of amateur boxers being in a hurry to turn pro, and that's really hurt our boxing team a considerable deal as the years have gone on, I think. Because publicity is publicity. And go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, the other thing, USA Boxing really, they really don't do a good job managing or promoting it. The amateur rules with the different scoring changes. I mean, they did, obviously the scoring changes they put into place in the I forget when they went to the point system in the late 80s, early 90s or whenever. That was supposed to make fights transparent, and you still had controversy in those fights, like with the Roy Jones fight in the Olympics. And so I think amateur boxing sometimes is its own, well, boxing in general is its own worst enemy sometimes. But yeah.
DG Sports Patrol, another good question from him. And I think you have touched on this before, Anthony. Would you ever rate Apollo Creed, Rocky Balboa, or Mr. T, who was Clever Lang in the Rocky movies, for the game, just for the hell of it?
Yeah, no, I actually do. I've got a few Rocky freebies that are on the Sideline Strategy website. Rocky, Apollo, and Spider Rico are 3 that are rated now. And I actually... But it's because Spider Rico was played by a real boxer. But I think one of the community members did a few of the other fighters too, including Drago and Lang. So, but I plan to do more. I plan to expand the Rocky universe, and there'll be freebies that I'll just put on the Facebook page and the website. Spider
Rico, in case unless somebody doesn't know, was the very first fighter Rocky Balboa fights in the first Rocky at I think it was a Catholic church in Philadelphia. So you're absolutely right. Spider Rico deserves to be in the game. Why not? Absolutely not. Okay, let's see here. I got Spider Rico was our Red Sox fan saying Spider Rico was a real boxer. Yeah, very, very true. Very true. Anybody else have questions for the group? I know, Anthony, you wanted to try to get this over with by 10 o'clock.
One of the worst. Oh.
What's that?
I'm looking at Mike's question about the Chris Weidman leg break. Yeah, I watched that card. That was I watch a lot of UFC too.
Oh yeah. Somebody had shown me that the morning after it happened. I was like, oh.
The worst part of that is it didn't register right away because he threw the kick and you saw no expression. Then when he went to put that leg back down, and all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, that was a terrible injury. Terrible injury.
Well, I remember seeing Joe Theismann break his leg in a couple of places on Monday Night Football, and that's all the injury porn I ever want to see.
It was very much like that.
Yeah. Al is saying Pedro Lavelle.
Yeah.
Okay. Pedro Lavelle. Oh, yeah. Pedro Lavelle was a heavyweight, wasn't he? I think.
What's that?
Pedro Lavelle was a heavyweight, was he not?
Yeah, heavyweight, real life heavyweight boxer, and Spider Rico in the original Rocky.
All right. Okay, so just just going over here and looking for more questions. Let's see here. I think we've covered everything. Oh, boy. Here's a hypothetical question for you. What do you think boxing looks like 50 years from now?
I think, honestly, unless there's some, positives right now, and if they continue on this, I like the fact that we get a lot of top quality free fights, more than we have for some time. I don't honestly know with streaming services, and boxing's got to do that. They have to get a better relationship with some of the networks. And main thing is, hey, have a good night, Al. The main thing is the top fighters need to fight each other. And, there's some guys out there that are doing that, but it still doesn't happen enough. I don't think the pay-per-view model is going to be able to sustain boxing because, you can get different streaming services and you can buy boxes now. I have one myself where you can get all those fights, and the other thing too is some of the like the circus stuff, like Floyd Mayweather fighting Logan Paul next month. That's not good for the sport. People say it brings eyeballs to the sport, but the eyeballs it brings are his YouTube followers. They don't care about boxing. They want to see a circus atmosphere. So I think they need to continue to build relationships with networks. I think really they should follow the UFC blueprint and force top fighters to fight each other. And that's hard because there's so many different sanctioning bodies. UFC is a company. And in boxing, you have WBA, WBC, IBO, WBO, blah, blah, blah. And it's to the point now where even those organizations have like 7 world titles per division. It's stupid.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah. They made a mockery of world championships in the sport because they want sanctioning fees for putting on title bouts, but you don't need a super heavyweight champion, a regular heavyweight champion, a diamond belt. It's BS. People don't want that.
Yeah, and I think if the governing bodies would ever stop and think that there's more money in consolidating the titles than there will ever be just keeping everybody separated. It's like college football in the playoffs. Same thing almost.
Yeah, and by doing that, you force fighters that want titles to fight other fighters with titles instead of, okay, I got the WBA. I don't care if I have the IBF. We don't need 5 world champions in every division. It's ridiculous. So.
But, as you say, the championships have to have identity, and right now they do not. If we're going to have 12 dozen champions all over the place. Let me see what else we got here. Oh, Sports Time Machine was pointing out another gruesome injury, and thank God I didn't watch this. This was on a pay-per-view. Sidney Udy was at a pay-per-view, and he broke his leg rather awkwardly.
He did that. Chris Candido did it at TNA pay-per-view too.
Oh,
which actually ended up, unfortunately, leading to.
It took his life, didn't it? Or it just led to him having drug problems when he would.
Yeah, well, he died of a blood clot because he traveled too soon, and you shouldn't fly when you have that type of surgery because you can have it is conducive to blood clots, and that's what happened with him, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why I don't like to look at it. Between that and the Gordon Smiley wreck at Indianapolis, and I think it was 81 or 82, where he hits the ball like head first and every bone in his body break. Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm kind of set for injury porn for a while. Anthony, how long do you want to keep going? How long did you want to keep going tonight?
I'm good for a little bit still.
Okay.
I hear my wife out there on the phone, so she doesn't need me right now.
Well, keep your questions coming, guys. Just, don't be shy, and I'll try to think of a few more here.
DG's got, what is your favorite boxer versus wrestler match?
Well, I think the one everybody knows is Ali and Inoki maybe Big Show against Mayweather. But Ali Inoki was kind of restricted in what he could do. And actually, that was supposed to be a work, but they couldn't agree on the finish. So it was just kind of a very, very awkward bout if you ever watch it on YouTube.
I remember, I think that was, God, that was in what, 75, 70? I know
myself, but you might be right.
I think it was around that time because I know I was 12 or 13. But yeah, it was a very boring fight too. I mean, if you want to watch a fun Antonio Inoki shoot, go look at him versus, oh God.
I know who you're talking about. The great Antonio.
Great Antonio. Yeah. That's
and Antonio's taking liberties with him. And Inoki just says, no, ain't doing that no more.
Andre versus Wepner was probably as close as you would get to a real shoot boxer versus wrestler, because Andre, I don't think was very amused with that whole concept.
Could you imagine Andre being born 20 years later than he was and being in UFC or MMA? Woo! He would make loads of money, sir.
Well, I don't know who they'd get to fight him. I mean,
that's true. That would be a problem. But imagine him being an MMA fighter.
I'm trying to think. Because UFC has a weight limit. Their weight limit for heavyweights is 260. He's never making that weight. So I don't know of any organizations that have a unlimited. He'd probably fight in Japan. I'm sure that some of the organizations over there allow unlimited weights, because Bob Sapp would fight over there. And God, who's that other huge guy?
There was a guy named Ake Bono who was big in he kind of wrestled and he kind of did MMA and he kind of went back and forth between the two.
Yeah, there was a big Korean guy too, and I can't think of his name, but he's like 7'1". And
I can see him, but I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
Zbyszko and Ledoux. Well, Ledoux was no slouch as a fighter. He could go, and Zbyszko. Yeah, that's kind of a strange bout, because Zbyszko, if you really want to make it believable, Ledoux would have a size advantage, and how would Zbyszko work around that? But I imagine it wasn't a shoot; it was a work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zbyszko was, he did a good job getting heat. I mean, I think his
he was a heat magnet.
Angle with Sammartino was probably one of the most electric of all time in terms of wrestling angles. But
I never liked how the WWF did a slow burn with everything. Sometimes I think when you do a heel turn, you just got to do it. That's just me. One of my favorite turns was the Barry Windham heel turn in '88 and not WCW yet, but NWA Mid-Atlantic. I just think if you got to do a heel turn, you got to do it quick. But yeah, Zbyszko was a heat magnet. You're absolutely right.
Vince Sr., if you want a good wrestling book, read Bob Backlund's book. I know Bob Backlund, a lot of people don't think he was a very exciting wrestler, but his autobiography is really good, because he goes really behind the scenes with Vince Sr. and how he did things. And he had a very specific formula. He would bring in, he liked to face champions. So Backlund, of course, was for years, and Sammartino before him. But he would bring in, he'd rotate his heels in, his top heels. And he always had the same formula. The first match would end with the babyface losing, like by cut or count out or something, where he wouldn't lose the title. And then they'd come back and have a second match. And if the money was good, then they'd do a third blow-off match. And these were always at the Garden. And, it's funny how he stayed so true to that formula year after year, never varied from it, but it still used to sell out the Garden a lot. So,
and if something works, you stick with it. Yeah. Absolutely right. Backlund was an amateur, wasn't he?
Yeah. He had a solid amateur background. He could have shot if he had to. And then that was kind of the thing in the territory days. promoters wanted their champions to be able, a good background to be able to shoot. You had guys like Thez, and Harley Race was tough too, just in case someone tried to do something funny and take the title, that they could still fight and keep it.
That's why the NWA kind of had a system where, okay, you could be a baby one night and a heel the next night, and it would work either way. It would work either way. Okay, so let's see. Chat? Anything you got for me, guys? Let's see here. We could go back to boxing if you want, Anthony. Another name I know on this list here, Frankie Randall, who was the first guy, I believe, to knock out and beat Julio Cesar Chavez. And yeah, I'm surprised he lost 18 fights. Maybe they thought he was like a journeyman, and then Chavez realized, oh, I'm in trouble.
Frankie, he was one of those weird characters. He, there was no question in his ability. He, he could be, when he wanted to be, a very good boxer. He just was very inconsistent. Pretty good puncher, really tall, had good length, moved well. Just never, he was one of those guys what's that phrase, like the girl with the curl, when she was good, she was very, very good. And when she was bad, she was rotten.
Very, very bad.
And he's one of those guys too that probably fought way too long as well, unfortunately.
Did you see Archie Moore against Ray Shires in the 60s? Well, that was before I was born, DG.
I was going to say, I don't know how old you think I am, but I was born in 63, so I don't remember that.
I think, DG, are you referring to Roy Shires, who was the promoter in San Francisco back then, who had for a very long time Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens as a good tag team, and they would feud off against each other. They had a very good territory in San Francisco at one point.
No, they really did. I'm familiar with Shires for sure, but I don't even. Yeah, I didn't see that one.
Let me see here. Question mark. Okay. Yeah, Roy Shire. And then when wrestling got big around 84, he was trying to tell everybody he was a worker. Like then everybody kind of knew, Everybody knew it was a work, but they all wanted to know more about the business, and that's why I thought it boomed in the 80s.
Well, it's funny. I when I was in the Army in the early 80s, I was in Augusta, Georgia for about a year, and we'd go down every Monday. Me and a buddy of mine, and sometimes a couple other people, would go down to the Augusta Bell Auditorium. And every Monday they'd come through, and that's when the Freebirds were there. So it was always them, and then some combination of Ted DiBiase or Tommy Rich or Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 trying to take the Georgia tag straps from them. And you kind of knew what was going on, but it was just you kind of wanted to suspend that reality just a little bit because it was just fun. It was a good outlet to go blow off steam. And we always had the same routine. We went to this place called the Moon Tree, got Chinese food, went down to the Bell Auditorium, $5 seats, and drank as much beer as we could, and then got back to base after the matches.
Hello to Steeler Fan. Steeler Fan has joined us. I know Steeler Fan has a big Glory Days boxing forum. I think it's on Operation Sports. I want to plug that to the whole because he does some good work on that and has tried to follow him in terms of his format to a degree. Yeah, Steeler Fan, thank you for dropping by, sir. In fact, he just subscribed to my channel.
Yeah, he does a real good job with that. And Matt, your card set will be in the mail tomorrow.
All right. And let's see what else we got. Roy and Ray. Roy Shire, Ray Shire. Yeah. I used to say in DG.
So some of them, I actually want to talk just a little bit about some of the other current active fighters. And I guess, I wanted to put current fighters into the game. It's kind of a double-edged sword though, because again, not a lot of them test themselves, against the other top guys. So they're kind of hard to rate based on that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. To answer that, that bundle price is never going to change. Basically, the bundle is going to be static at 8 fighter sets. And when I get the flyweights done, the flyweights will replace the second heavyweight set in the bundle. And then the second heavyweight, the supplement set, and then any other set I release will be separate. And two reasons for that. One, I just didn't want to keep creating bundles that exponentially went up in price. And two, and probably most important, 8 fighter sets is all I can fit in the box. So.
Yes, sir. You were talking about the current and historical.
So
yeah, go ahead.
It's tough to rate those guys. Like Teofimo Lopez, give him credit. He stepped in against a Vasily Lomachenko at a very young stage of his career. And, Lomachenko fought a horrible fight. He waited way too long, but, Lopez took it to him and did what he had to do to win. So I think Lopez is going to end up being a generational fighter. We haven't really seen him take a punch yet. So that could happen when he fights Ryan Garcia or Gervonta Davis if they do fight. But I think Lopez is going to be a generational type fighter where he'll be considered one of the all-time greats if he stays on his course. The other lightweights are all very good. We've talked about Davis. Ryan Garcia is it's kind of like, reminds me of a lightweight Tommy Hearns type fighter. He's really long, has long punches, but he's got really good power for a skinny guy. Some of the other guys, Artur Beterbiev, the light heavyweight, he's kind of an anomaly. He's only fought 16 times, all knockouts, but he's very much like Ivan Drago and Rocky, a very typical Eastern European fighter, stands straight up, comes straight forward, very mechanical. It's jab, jab, and then he'll bring that cross behind it. And, he can get hit, but he is so relentless in his pressure and hits so hard, nobody's really been able to back him up yet. So I'm looking forward to, I'd like to see Canelo actually move up to light heavy and fight him. I think that would be an excellent fight and a fight that would generate a lot of buzz. The other guys up there for him, Joe Smith Jr. Just captured one of the light heavyweight belts. Joe Smith Jr. can crack. He's got a punch, but I don't think he has what it takes to beat Beterbiev. So, there's fighters like that part of the deal is they just don't have really solid competition to test themselves against. And he's one of those in that. Dillian White, he was a no-brainer. I don't necessarily think Dillian White is one of the more skilled heavyweights out there. He's just skilled enough to be he's obviously got a belt, but he's not anywhere up there with the top guys like Tyson Fury, Joshua, Deontay Wilder. I don't even think he beats Andy Ruiz. I think Andy Ruiz would handle him fairly easily as well. So,
does Ruiz still have a bright future? Do you think that he will get a title shot in the near future?
It's, he looked really good against Areola. He started slow and got cut. That's his problem. He tends to get caught early in fights. And, he's tough. I mean, Joshua hits hard. He got up from that. If Deontay Wilder hits him like Joshua did, I don't think he gets up. But like I said, I think he's got probably the best hand speed in the division. He's pretty technically sound. He has a good 3-piece where it's just the jab, cross, hook. He throws that 3-piece combination really well. He hit Areola with it time and again in their fight. So I think he can be tough. It just depends on him. He's kind of like a modern Tony Galento, where you look at him and he's like, God, this guy trained on beer. And even though he lost 20 pounds, or he was lighter than he'd ever been when he fought Areola, he still looked sloppy. Yeah,
so they were showing highlights of his prior fights, and he did not look like he looked like Butterbean.
Yeah,
he looked a little bit like Butterbean. I don't know. Go
I
ahead.
think it depends on how seriously he commits himself to training. I don't think he's ever going to be one of the top. I don't think he'll ever be the best guy in the heavyweight division, but I think he can be top 5 in the current crop, top 5 or 6.
Arnold asks, and I know we touched on this earlier, but he might have missed it. Are you still going to put out a fantasy boxer set?
Yeah, I am going to do that, Arnold. And what I've decided to do on that is, there's a few people that really are interested in it and not a lot of wide demand. So I haven't decided for sure, but definitely I'll put it out PDF. If there's enough demand, I might do a small print run. And then going forward, I want to have that like a living set. I don't want to do a printed set just to change a few fighters or debut a few new fighters every year. So I won't do that, but I'll release new PDF versions every year or two, to kind of keep it a living universe. And then the second thing I was doing, it'll just be kind of like a catch-all generic division like I did with the free tomato cans, where there's no heavyweights, middleweights. It's just 100 fighters. And you can classify them however you want. Just because I don't think it's feasible to do 8 divisions of fictional fighters. So just keep it to 100 generic fictional fighters. And, they'll all have little backstories behind them. And I think that'll be kind of fun. So, yeah, I definitely still plan to do that as well. I don't know. I might even be a freebie set. I'll have to see when that time comes.
For the people who get the PDF cards, I would imagine that printing it on paper would be inadvisable. What would you advise them to do if they get a PDF? Try to find a good cardstock?
Yeah, I do the printed sets on 130 cardstock, 130 pound mat cardstock. That's hard to find in your franchise, like your Office Maxes. Usually they don't carry that. But I would definitely probably recommend a 110 pound cardstock, a good matte cardstock. I think that works better than gloss. So that's what I would recommend for PDF for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, I was kind of contemplating how to phrase that question, because people get the PDFs, and I was just kind of wondering, well, obviously you wouldn't want to print it on paper. So yeah, that's a good answer.
Well, Al does another really good, cool thing with PDFs. He gets PDF sets as well as printed. He just snips them and puts them up on his screen so you can see the cards. So that's a way you could play it as well if you were so inclined.
Kind of like how I've been doing with the segment by segment score on mine, where I just superimpose it and I put it in the corner and I just keep a running total. Improvise, guys. Improvise. Make it your own. I'm totally for that. We're going to do a couple of fights tomorrow, by the way, Anthony. We're going to do a couple of welterweights. I'm going to do Ross and Berto, Barney Ross and Andre Berto, and McLarnin and Hunnigan. Jimmy McLarnin and Lloyd Hunnigan, who was always somebody who I followed back in the 80s, because everybody thought he was going to lose to Donald Curry one night, and Hunnigan just whipped his butt. And then he had trouble with, I think it was Mark Breland, stocky welterweight if you've never seen him. And I remember that fight they had in London where Breland was just dominating him, and you could hear the commentators on ABC saying, stop the fight, because it was so one-sided. But Hunnigan was another very, very good fighter. I'm looking forward to using him.
I've got a soft spot for all my fellow Brits who are boxers as well, so yeah.
Outside of Tyson Fury, who do you think was the best British? Well, Lennox Lewis. I just answered my own question. Lennox Lewis would also be another great British heavyweight. Outside those two, who would you think would be the best British heavyweight?
I think those two are probably a cut above. Anthony, you know what? Anthony Joshua has the talent to be better than both of those guys, the physical talent. I don't know if he has. He just doesn't seem like Tyson Fury is a fighter. He loves the game. He's committed. He's got great instincts. I don't know if Joshua has that commitment and those instincts, that love. I think he's doing it because he can he can because he's good at it, not because necessarily it's a passion. So I think that stops him. Beyond those two, going back, Frank Bruno was, not, I don't put him with them, but he was pretty solid. Henry Cooper was a very solid fighter. He cut like wet tissue paper, but he gave fighters trouble. And then beyond that, there's other solid guys, Don Cockell, Brian London, guys that were contenders, but you wouldn't really necessarily classify them as great heavyweights. So, yeah.
Bruno gets the credit of being the guy that was the first guy to back Tyson up. Although if you watch Tyson's fight, who did he fight? Like Pinklin Thomas. Pinklin Thomas could also box with Tyson. Everybody gives Tyson, I think, just a little too much credit. Look what some of the other fighters who fought Tyson pre-Buster Douglas were able to do. Tony Tucker. Tony Tucker was another guy who could hang with Tyson. Tyson did not, as I look back, Tyson did not dominate that division as much as people think he did.
No, his big equalizer was his power. And, he's like Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder got exposed a little bit when he fought Tyson Fury because he's very lateral in his movements. He has a very wide stance. He's straight in, straight back, and it's always jab, right hand. And Fury was able to create angles and time him and then back him up, which nobody had been. And going back, I mentioned this well before he fought Fury. I watched him fight Gerald Washington probably 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5. And Washington was another lengthy heavyweight, and he kind of gave the blueprint on how to beat Wilder. He hung with him for 4 or 5 rounds until Wilder was able to get that right hand through. Tyson would have fit really well in an older era of heavyweights because he wasn't a big heavyweight by modern standards. And if he goes back and fights in Marciano's era or before that, he's the same size as all those guys, and I think that would have made him a lot more fearsome too. But he was usually the smaller of the two. He's fighting guys 6'3", 6'4" sometimes, and but still, Tyson, if he had stayed straight and if Customato had been in his life longer and not passed away, and even more important than that, Bill Caton. Those guys kind of kept him on the right path, and I think he would have done. And Tyson accomplished a lot, and I love Mike Tyson. I think I love him more now, as much now as I did when he fought. I think he's a national treasure. But he would have accomplished a lot more in the ring if he'd, been able to stay straight and keep those guys around longer.
Kevin Rooney knew how to handle Mike Tyson. I watched those fights from the 80s, and if Tyson was in trouble, all Rooney had to do was whisper to him, say, "Here's what you're doing wrong. This is what you need to do." And Tyson would listen, and Tyson would fix the problems he was in. When they got rid of Rooney, when they got rid of Kevin Rooney, Tyson was never the same again.
Well, when Aaron Snow is nowhere near the trainer Kevin Rooney is, so that hurt. And he changed his style. But here's something else that people don't give Mike Tyson credit for, and they should. Mike Tyson is a genuine student of the game. I mean, his managers, Caton had that large fight collection. Tyson would sit and study those fight films for hours. He patterned his style a little bit off Jack Dempsey, and he understood the game. And Tyson, I don't think gets enough credit for that cerebral part, that understanding of boxing, and been a student as much as he should. I really don't. And that kind of went out the window as he got further along in his career and got away from those good influences. But as a young fighter, Tyson was a very cerebral fighter and a great student of the game.
Very much so. Very much so. DG Sports Patrol. Leon White, a.k.a. Vader, was at ringside at the Tyson-Douglas fight in Japan, and he claims Tyson had took a dive. Any chance that happened? Can I go first and just say no. I watched that fight. I watched that fight live on HBO when it happened. No. Douglas was just popping that jab at him all night, and Tyson never met a fighter. Well, he met Larry Holmes, who had a great jab, but Holmes was past it by that point. But no, I totally disagree.
That was legit. Tyson got caught, and you could tell he was discombobulated by the fact that he tried to put his mouthpiece in. If
he had left it alone, he might have been able to continue, and at least until he got knocked down again, because I think Douglas would have finished him.
Yeah, that was no dive. I don't think so.
And I think that's just Vader trying to make a name for himself. God bless him, and may he rest in peace, because he passed away a couple of years ago. Let's see what else we got. See here real fast. I also note that you took a look at some of the old heavyweights, Anthony, like Bob Pastor, who was respected. He was 53-7-5. That's an interesting name to have on the set. And you had a lot of people here and a lot of people there.
Yeah, there's the heavyweights especially. I mean, heavyweights always been the glamour division, and people know heavyweights a lot more than other classifications because of that. And, Pastor was a good contender. Another one that was a must to get in this set was Hasim Rahman, because he's the only lineal champion that was not included in the game, and now he is. So you could have a complete lineal championship if you choose to. And obviously, like we already talked about, Dillian White, and Usyk is a current fighter. Again, he's another good contender. I don't think he'll ever be a top guy, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of round that out, get a couple of old historical guys in there. Same with the middleweights, with getting Giardello in there and Laszlo Papp as well.
Right. We'll do last call for questions here. In fact, just as I say that, Anthony, what's the timetable on your wrestling thing? Good question. Fire away, sir.
So here are the future plans for Glory Days games going forward. Next, I'm gonna in about a week or so start research on the flyweight set, get that out, then do some cleanup on the game, and simultaneously I'm going to be working on the college football game. I want to get that out by the end of the 2021 college season with the 2021 teams. And at that point, I'll also want to get the baseball game out for some beta testing. I don't plan to release the baseball game for quite some time. And after college, the next official release will be the wrestling game. I'm not pleased. I've got the engine designed. I'm just not pleased. It's obviously going to be very similar to Glory Days boxing. But there's some differences, some nuances I have to sort out, and I'm not quite where I want to be with that yet. But the wrestling game could come out in 2022 if things go well and I get time with that. I just don't want to overpromise on that for sure.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I think in line with that, Anthony, I think a lot of people would be asking about the flyweight set. And I think flyweights would be the toughest to do because you have a lot of good flyweight fighters who get to the title and they probably have 10 to 20 fights. And I imagine that's really got to be rough getting a good sample size on some of these guys.
Yeah, they historically fight less than a lot of the other divisions. And it's such, again, it's not a glamour division, so the research is harder. I'll have to rely a lot more on YouTube, I think, than I do in a lot of the other cases because, there's just not a lot of good historical reading material out there on a lot of the flyweights, and some like Panama Brown and Pancho Villa and, those guys. But, for the most part, not a lot of them are well known, so. One
name that comes to mind in that division would be Michael Carbajal, but I think he kind of moved around flyweight.
He did. He'll be there. Humberto Gonzalez, El Chiquito will be there as well. So, there's definitely some very good flyweights out there. It's just a lot of good Japanese flyweights that never got the exposure in the States. So, it'll definitely be some research, but there are quite a few people that want the flyweights that like them. And what I'll probably do too is move some of I'm not going to do straw weights or, junior flyweights ever.
That'd be next to impossible. Yeah.
No. I honestly don't think there's enough interest. Like, the junior welterweights in this set, those are named guys that people know, that people are excited about. Nobody's going to be excited about 20 straw weights. So I'll probably take 2 or 3 of the best in those junior divisions and move them up and rate them as flies too.
Well, the junior divisions are relatively brand new to boxing anyway, except maybe junior welterweight, junior middleweight. A lot of these divisions, super middleweight, of course, is a very sexy division right now, but a lot of these divisions really didn't get started until the 20th century, and in some instances, the late 20th century.
Yeah.
Like mid to late 20th century. Cruiserweights didn't get started until about, say, 75 or beyond. Like Billy Douglas, who was Buster Douglas' son, would now be called a cruiserweight, although I think they called it something like junior heavyweight or super light heavyweight, something like that.
And that's the thing, cruiserweight, there was never a need for it because you go back and look at the lineage of champions, the only 2 outliers you really had in the first 60, 70 years of the 20th century were Jess Willard, who I think was 6'6", or 6'5", and Primo Carnera, who was, 6'6", 6'7" too. All the rest of the guys mostly were, 6 foot, 6'1", maybe 6'2", and they weighed, they fought between 190 and 210 pounds. So they were fighting as cruiserweights all this time. And then just, in the last, 40 years, the heavyweights started to get a lot bigger, and that kind of necessitated that new division. But
Primo Carnera, you brought up an interesting name, Anthony. There was a lot of talk, and I don't know how true it is, that Carnera won a lot of fights because his opposition took dives. What do you think about all of that? There was definitely a mob influence in his fights. The thing that is generally, accepted as truth, though, is that Carnera was not party to that. He didn't know what was going on a lot behind the scenes, but the Italian mob was definitely influential in some of the outcomes of his fights. But for the most part, people generally give Carnera a clean bill of health in terms of those shenanigans, that a lot of what was going on he was not aware of, and by all accounts, he was a very humble, good guy, a genuine guy. Went on to spent a lot of years in professional wrestling after his boxing career was up too. So it seems logical.
He was involved, but I don't think he was a party to most, or if any, of it.
Like, for instance, in Raging Bull, they try to make the point very quietly that LaMotta was controlled by the mob. Not controlled, but that the mob had a very keen interest in his progress in the middleweight division. It's widely rumored that he took a dive in a fight with Billy Fox, and then after that, after he got off suspension, he beat Marcel Cerdan to win the middleweight title. What, about 1950?
Yeah, and gambling and boxing have always been synonymous, going back to the bare knuckle days, and I think boxing, more than any other sport, it's easy to get your hooks in if you're a criminal element, because you're dealing with individuals. Hey, loses, and especially back then, I think if anyone went up to Tyson Fury and offered him money to throw a fight now, why would he? He's going to get paid $5-6 million. He'd tell him to get the hell out of here. But back then, where guys were fighting for $1,000 a fight or whatever, and someone came and offered you $5,000 to just not do your best that night, what are you going to do? I mean,
absolutely.
That doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable,
DG Sports Patrol, thank you so much for all your questions tonight, DG. What about women's boxing? Any plans? I know that there have been PDFs on the Glory Days Boxing Group on Facebook. Somebody did a women's set. Your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not the expert on women's boxing to the level I am on men's. I just, one thing, it's hard to follow. And, Al and I, a couple of weeks ago, interviewed a female boxer, Keisha McLeod, who's a friend of mine and a great person, great boxer. But, it's hard to get the exposure. Now, you mentioned Mark Jones, who's part of the Glory Days community. He is very much entrenched, a lot more than I am, in women's boxing. And we talked a while ago about, how to rate and different rating formulas, things to look for. And he's done a very good job rating. Right now, I think he's up to 80. I'm going to actually add some, but there's a freebie set of women's boxers on the Facebook group and also the Sideline Strategy website. And he's sending me more. So we'll probably end up with about 100 female boxers across different weight classes, and they will all be free for the taking.
Now, that's another part of boxing that has just come online within the last half century or so. The first time I took a look at women's boxing was when Christy Martin got good.
Oh, yeah.
Christy Martin was a good fighter. Then there was Layla Ali and Lucia Riker, who was the kind of the villainous and million dollar baby. The more the merrier, man. The more the merrier. If people like women's boxing, I'm all for it. It's Olympic. It's in the Olympics, for heaven's sakes. So, yeah, absolutely.
And there's been, and I think what hurts it, I mean, one, it obviously doesn't get the respect of men's boxing, and two, I think there's such a drop off in talent between the top female fighters versus, you watch the fights, you see it, when a boxers, and you see that in men's boxing too, but there's a greater disparity, I think, in talent, especially fighters who are starting out. They'll fight against someone and you're like, God, she has no business being in the ring, and so I think that hurts it as well. And the difference is obviously women fight 2-minute rounds as well. So I just don't think there's enough female boxers. Clarissa Shields is probably the most well-known now, but she's talking about fighting, having a boxing match with Amanda Nunes, who is best pound for pound MMA female fighter in the world. And, Amanda, and I think Amanda could strike with her in straight boxing, but she says, you want to fight me, come to my world.
So Nunes wants to pull off a Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But, she's not, I like Amanda. She's not just going to go chase a payday to get in the ring. For one, I think she's a bigger draw than Clarissa Shields. So it's like she told her, you want to fight me in a cage. And Clarissa Shields has no business in a cage. So that probably will never happen.
All right. Anthony, let me give you the floor here, sir, to plug your new set. Tell us anything I forgot about doing tonight during the meet.
Now, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's mixed, Glory Days Boxing mixed supplemental set, the first mixed set that was released, and there will be a couple of more down the road. But again, excited about that because all the fighters are pretty much top level guys. And, there's current and historical fighters, 20 of them. So you'll get a lot of the current top guys, and beyond the ones we've already named, Demetrius Andrade's in there, Jamal Charlo, Caleb Plant. I rated Caleb Plant as a middleweight because I didn't do a super middleweight. And then all-time greats in some of the junior divisions, a junior welterweight set. Of course, you've got guys like Antonio Cervantes, Wilfred Benitez, of course, Aaron Pryor. And we talked about Nicolino Loche earlier, and Dulio Loy. They're in there as well, and that's probably the most talented set of the 20 or the 100 that are in the game. I did 20 cruiserweights, 20 junior middleweights, and that's got some guys who had never fought in other divisions, like Tony Ayala Jr., who quite honestly could have been an exceptionally great fighter if he hadn't got sidetracked with legal trouble. Maurice Hope, and it's got a couple of guys, Davey Moore, who took a beating against Roberto Duran, but was a very good action fighter. Terry Norris, and then some other guys that fought in higher divisions like John Mugabe, Winky Wright, and Mike McCallum, draw a blank. And then also junior lightweights and some notable guys there. A lot of these guys did not fight in other divisions. Guys that were television favorites in the 80s, Rocky Lockridge, Rafael Bazuco Leon, Jesse James Leha, Diego Corrales, the Snake Man, Alfredo Escalera, guys like that. So, yeah, I think it'll be a fun set, good parity in the set. And that is actually went up for sale tonight on the Sideline Strategy website, PDF and printed sets, which will ship over the weekend and into Monday.
Outstanding. Well, Anthony, I thank you very much for spending this last hour and a half with us almost. This was wonderful. I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Yeah, I absolutely enjoyed it, and then always a pleasure, my friend. Like I said, we had fun on the draft and this as well. So, yeah, we'll definitely hook up again and do some more chats down the road. Anything you want to talk about?
Thank you very much, sir. For everybody else, this has been the second episode of The Meet with Big Pauly. I got Tom Vogel, Wrestling's Finest, potentially coming up next week. So for everybody out there, this is Big Pauly. This has been Anthony. Godspeed and God bless. We'll do it all again soon. And bye-bye for now, everybody.
Have a good one, guys.